CEO of the Consumer Technology Association, Gary Shapiro, and advisor to the President of the United States, and co-chair American Workforce Policy Advisory Council, Ivanka Trump.
Well, welcome to CES. We're so honored to have you.
It's great to be here. Hi, everyone. What a group.
Well, there's been a lot of focus on this, and I think it's terrific because you are focusing on such an important subject. But I want to start a little bit in the beginning. You are advisor to the president. What does that mean, and how did you select what your focus is?
Well, I've been predominantly focused on pro-growth policies, whether it be the enabling environment that encourages companies to invest, grow, and flourish in the United States. Many of you are illustrative of the boom that is happening. Or it's the policies that build upon that foundational environment, tax cuts, deregulations, and ensure pathways for all Americans to be able to secure great paying careers in this booming economy. So that's really my foremost passion and focus, removing barriers and obstacles for people who want and can work to be able to provide for themselves and their families. And there really has never been a better time to be working in America than today. And there's never been more people working in America than today. 160 million Americans are working. Record low unemployment across every demographic. Amazingly, and this is a statistic that I think is so important. So, it's well known that for the past 14 plus months, more job vacancies exist by almost, actually a little over 1 million than unemployed Americans. But what's incredible is that over the past year, of all the people who have secured jobs in this economy, 73% of them were from the sidelines. Not even on unemployment. They were totally outside of the workforce. They've been marginalized. And they're coming back into the workforce, in part because of the work we're doing alongside academia and the many great employers who have committed to our shared goals of helping Americans secure the skills to be able to fill the job vacancies. But it's an amazing thing that's happening where, because wages are up, because there's more economic opportunity, people are coming off the sidelines, they're going through these training programs, and they're securing the skills that enable them to compete in the long term.
And that's true. Actually, in our industry, consumer technology, we have 2,000 plus American companies that are our members, and 4 out of 5 of our executives are concerned and having challenge in filling the jobs they have today. So what is it that you are doing that is part of that?
It's one of the #1 concerns we have from employers, and it's also a concern and a potential impediment to growth happening on a state and local level. So when we had the governors join us at the White House last year, I gave the keynote address because the #1 concern cited was lack of skilled workforce. But it isn't a lack of worker. There's 6.5 million unemployed Americans, but then there are countless that aren't included in that statistic because they've been marginalized and are outside of the workforce. So I love what's happening because it's forcing employers to get creative. We have the lowest percentage of unemployment for disabled Americans in the history of this country. The lowest percentage. We are working towards the goal of bringing down the unemployment rate for our returning citizens, the formerly incarcerated, from the mid-20s to single digits over the next 5 years. The president is building upon the work of the First Step Act to ensure that those who have done their time, served their time, come back into their communities, are able to acquire the skills that they need to succeed. And it's been incredible because we've seen organizations across this country start to think about hiring the formerly incarcerated, even teaming up with local prisons to create programs in partnership with NGOs to help those that are soon to be released learn the skills while they're incarcerated so that they can come back and acquire a job. I was just in Indiana with the governor a couple of weeks ago in December, where I visited a program that was started by The Last Mile, an incredible organization that is really doing great work to lower recidivism. They actually have zero recidivism, which is remarkable after 10 years in operation. And this was a maximum security female prison in Indiana, where I met people who were learning complicated coding computer science applications who had never been on the internet before because they were incarcerated prior to the internet having been, as available as it obviously is today, in some cases 20 plus years. And what they were able to do in these simulated programs was remarkable. So it's a very, very exciting time to be in the workforce. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about is the fact that there really is this blue-collar boom that is taking place in this country. If you look at where wages are rising the fastest, they're rising the fastest in the bottom quintile. They're rising the fastest for blue-collar workers. And technology is helping enhance and fuel productivity, but we're here obviously talking about the way jobs are evolving and changing. And to do the same job today in many industries outside of what's considered sort of a traditional quote-unquote technology industry, there is a technical application and a technical literacy that's required. So it's not only about training for the jobs of the future. People need to be thinking about investing in their current workforce so that they can enable those people to do their same job using different equipment tomorrow.
When we met at the White House in March, I was talking to you about all the great benefits of technology. I was talking about the book we had published last year, which described it fully about artificial intelligence, self-driving cars, robotics. And you turned to me and said, this is all great, but what about the people who are the factory workers and the drivers and the clerks who are concerned that they may be left behind by this technology generation? And you actually challenged me, and the reason I'm disclosing this publicly is because the paperback version is out today, and it has a chapter that's added because of you, which is about the workforce of the future, because my empathy is probably very low, and I know I have to work on it, but the truth is that we have to focus on the fact that there is discomfort with change, and my career is focused on change, but this is a big change, and we've always thought that the number of new jobs is going to exceed the jobs that are lost, and that may be true in this case, we don't know, but when you talk about drivers and self-driving cars and some of the other things, it's a challenge, and you started talking about all the different things you're doing, so I'd like to go through some of the things that the White House and the administration are doing. Could you walk us through some of those?
Well, I think if this conversation resonated with you, it's because your empathy isn't low. So first and foremost, but this president campaigned on lifting all Americans, but really focused on the forgotten men and women of this country. You just mentioned self-driving cars. Well, in the majority of the states in this country, truck driving is the single largest occupation. So while I share your view that innovation, it can't be bridled, right? It never works. Any country who's tried to impede innovation, they fail to do so over the long run, and they hurt themselves in the short and the medium run. And I also believe that innovation is a net job producer. Jobs will be created in industries that don't even exist today because of innovation. Innovation will enable productivity innovation will allow for more inclusive growth. Disabled Americans we were talking about before will be able to use robotic arms to do tasks they wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. So I'm a big believer in innovation and the positive impact that productivity has on an economy and fighting for American dominance in the industries of the future. With that said, it is our responsibility as we think about this country and the health of all Americans to be anticipating where there will be disruption, whether it's long-term or or short term, and coming up with a plan to help transition those people. So when I hear employers would come to me and they'd say, we need more skilled workers, we need more skilled workers, and then I'd read about them laying off segments of their workforce because they were investing in productivity, and not having spent the time when they had known 3 years prior they'd be making that investment and upgrading those systems, not taking the time to take those workers and reskill them and retrain them into their job vacancies. Well, I have very little sympathy for that. So I have been fighting, and this president has been fighting, on raising awareness within the private sector through our Pledge to America's Workers, where we have gotten over 400 companies to commit to over 14 million training and reskilling opportunities for their current workforce. So that's upskilling, reskilling, enhanced education opportunities, and for the future workforce, that's apprenticeships, etc. There are many people in this audience who have signed our pledge. I was just backstage chatting with Mark Benioff from Salesforce, who's right there. He signed our pledge with us in Indiana. We were together in Indianapolis last spring to skill 1 million American workers over the next 5 years. So we're very excited. Behind me are several of the other companies.
These are actually the Consumer Technology Association members of the
Yes, and Gary stepped up in a very meaningful way. But part of this idea of the pledge was to galvanize and catalyze private sector interests. It's not enough to come to us and say, thank you for cutting taxes to ensure that we're competitive in a global marketplace and that we're able to compete. Thank you for creating the enabling environment by being thoughtful about regulation and eliminating redundant regulation that doesn't achieve its desired goals. But we need more workers and we're not willing to make the investment. What we know is most of the federal government training programs don't work. What does work is when the private sector teams with a community college, a technical school, a university, a high school, and develops a curriculum that is taught to students, and then ultimately they hire those students that are coming out. There's a great program that NAM just took over in Kentucky that Toyota, one of the members who signed the pledge, who's up there, developed to train people in advanced manufacturing. There are great innovations happening. So we wanted to catalyze that, but that isn't enough. We're also looking at the federal government at what else we can do. So we created the National Council for the American Worker, comprised of 14 federal agencies that I chair, where we are developing for the first time ever a national workforce strategy that really combines the effort of HHS, which is focused on early childhood. So Head Start, for example, is part of HHS, with the Department of Education, with the National Science Foundation, with the Department of Labor. There have to be connectivity and synergy between the efforts that are happening across the federal government. So we'll be issuing this national workforce strategy, which will be a blueprint to job training, reskilling, and demand-driven education in the coming months. We also have committed unprecedented, and industry has a very strong funding towards apprenticeships, because celebrates and embraces apprenticeship, invested in education, but few other industries do.
Okay.
So we've worked with the Department of Labor, and we've put out $300 million of funding to encourage education and apprenticeships to be formed in industries such as cybersecurity, in tech support, in healthcare, industries that should have apprenticeship ecosystems and don't.
So we are trying to model that behavior. On this stage, exactly a year ago, Ginny Rometty, who serves on one of your councils, Chairman and CEO of IBM, announced that we have a partnership with the Consumer Technology Association, that IBM's apprenticeship coalition, IBM's apprenticeship program would be extended throughout our industry. And we've already had 40 companies sign up and say they want to do this, because you're right, apprenticeships for the skilled trades are very common, and that's accepted. But the fact is, as I think Jamie Dimon just said this week, it's not about degrees anymore, it's about skills.
That's right. My first international trip was to Germany. where I toured Siemens in Berlin, which is considered the gold standard of apprenticeship. And it's really employer-driven, employer-led. And these are wildly successful programs, but it just is not part of the American DNA outside of the skills trades. And we want to change that. And industry wants to change that. So we're opening up the pathways and we're incentivizing action. And Ginny's been a great champion of all things related to workforce. You mentioned she sits on an advisory council we put together, which really informs the work we're doing through our national council, but also we gave them a really specific mandate. So we asked them to explore 4 things that would be complementary but not redundant of what we're able to do at the federal government. And 2 of them I'll share with you now, if you'll give me a few moments. I think one of the challenges we have in this country is that there is a belief that has been ingrained in society that there's one path A, and that's 4-year college. And while that is a great path for many Americans, most Americans don't take that path, and it is not the right path for all Americans. So we want to celebrate the other pathways that exist, whether it be apprenticeships, whether it be a credential. Many of the industries, tech support, cybersecurity jobs, not all of them require a bachelor's degree. So thinking, and you had mentioned, Gary, the importance of defining work based on skills rather than credentials is incredibly important and requires a major shift in our thinking. So one of the things we've asked this advisory board to do and tasked them with, and we'll be unveiling it in the weeks ahead, is to create a massive national ad campaign. So we're working with the Ad Council, and we're going to launch this massive campaign which celebrates these other pathways that don't require 4-year college. We don't want to denigrate that. We have the greatest university ecosystem in the world, and we're proud of that. But we need people to know that there are other pathways, because you know what? Not only for the student, who may be good with their hands, but don't know where that can take them and where that leads them. But if you're a mid to late career worker who needs to learn a new skill in order to maintain relevancy in the modern economy, guess what? You're not going back to 4-year college. So why not make Pell Grants available to high-quality, shorter-term programming? We're fighting to do that. We've just launched a pilot with the Department of Education, and we're fighting to have legislation passed to make Pell Grants available also to prisoners, those who are eligible and likely to be released. But if you're a mid to late career worker, it is likely today that you may need to be reskilled multiple times in your career, and you're not going to go back to college to do it. So we need to open the aperture and raise awareness around the many options that exist, and the industries are very excited to do that. You look at manufacturing, and I view most manufacturing as high-tech manufacturing these days. In America, manufacturing is high-tech manufacturing. Actually, if you talk to a lot of manufacturers, they get very upset with Silicon Valley because they say, hey, we're the original high-tech. We've been displaced. But that is not the perception in many young people's mind, or their parents, or their guidance counselors. So just disrupting the stereotypes around what a manufacturing job looks like today, because guess what? There are 500,000 vacant jobs in manufacturing that are well paid and don't require a college degree. So we're going to be launching a year-long, hopefully beyond that, national ad campaign to try and fill those 7+ million vacant jobs that exist in America today with American workers who are unemployed or on the sidelines, or who are looking to learn a new skill. We're also very excited. We've tasked this board with creating an interoperable learning record, and we're bringing all the stakeholders to the table and saying, you know what? We need to harness technology and data to enable people to have their information in their iPhone, just like we've enabled the health industry. Now we have the interoperable health records, and it's been one of the early successes of this administration, really opening up that data and making it available so that people have control of their own information. But why can't you have your high school degree verified and in your phone. So an employer, A, doesn't need to call your high school and find out, did you in fact graduate? So it takes the friction out of the process. It's verified, it's there, but it's all right there, but also on-the-job skills that were learned. Maybe you learned CPR as a lifeguard. Maybe you learned or got upskilled working on a factory floor and acquired a new skill. All of that should be cataloged and tracked and accessible and available and empowering the individual, as opposed to locked up and siloed in the HR department of a company where if you leave, it stays with them as opposed to travels with you. So we're bringing together all the major players and saying, how can we help develop and innovate off big government data and create this interoperable learning record? And some genius at marketing in this audience will give it a better name. Resume of the future, whatever we want to call it, because interoperable learning record is not well branded. But how can we empower the individual to have all of the skills they've acquired over their lifetime available, accessible, and oh, by the way, wouldn't it be great if there was a job vacancy in your zip code that matched the skill you have if it got pushed to you? This is not hard to do, it just hasn't been done. So we're quite excited about taking this on.
4 different strategies, and that was one?
Yes, that was one. The branding campaign is one to sort of expose people to the different viable pathways to achieving a family-sustaining career. Another working group, Al Kelly is leading this one with Johnny Taylor, the head of SHRM. Ginny Rometty and Tim Cook are leading the working group on
SHRM was
the
the Society for Human Resources Management.
Yes.
You're really part of Washington now. You use that.
Yes, sorry, yes. It was important to get all the different HR organizations to help us address the third one, which is if we really want to think about hiring by skill as opposed to by credential or school degree, which may or may not be relevant. Amazingly, 4 out of 10 Americans with a college degree working today are working in jobs that don't require one. So breaking it down based on the skills as opposed to the degree is really important. So we asked this group to come together and think about HR practices and ways we can disrupt it, and think about hiring in a new way, and really disseminate that information. So not only how companies think about investing in workforce training in terms of their balance sheets, it's the first line item that's cut. But it's also even in this booming economy where everyone is pointing to this program or that program. Very few CEOs can tell you how much they actually spend on workforce development per worker. They can point to a program with 20 people in it that they've just stood up, but they really can't tell you what type of investment they're making in the skills and talents of their current and future workforce. They can with healthcare benefits to $1. But we need to make people internalize this as a core obligation of an employer. Increasingly, there is a drive within corporations, you see it with BRT, to think about what is their social impact. And I would say the most important social impact you should be opining on is the health and the prosperity and the commitment you have to your own family, your own workforce. So we're pushing employers to do that. Thinking about HR also through the lens of what degrees are actually required for what jobs. I was talking to Ginny, and they were having a lot of challenges recruiting people to fill vacant cybersecurity jobs at IBM. And she said when they went back and looked at the application to fill those jobs, the HR department had put in a requirement for a bachelor's degree, which was not a requirement for many of the cyber jobs that they were looking to fill, so they changed that policy. So what policies are creating these artificial barriers? Also, second chance hiring. Ban the box. So we're going to come out with a whole list of policies that we want companies and HR departments around the country and globe to examine and really be introspective about, so that they can ensure that for everyone, so that they can ensure that they're not inadvertently screening out qualified applicants for jobs that they currently have vacant today.
Well, Jamie Dimon actually also said this week that 3/4 of their jobs that are open now do not require a college degree.
Correct.
So the government itself is the largest purchaser of technology, and one of the complaints I've heard is that when you're doing IT project for the government, they require you have all these people with all these degrees. So if you come up through an apprenticeship program based on skills, you are ineligible to work on a government project. And that's one of the things the government itself can look at.
We're changing a lot of that, including second chance hiring, and so we are looking at all of those programs internally. The Office of OMB through their management department, because you're right, government procurement is. We could have a whole panel on government procurement and the challenges there, and also some of the challenges to ensuring that we're hiring people based on qualifying skills as opposed to credentials.
Well, you've covered a lot of ground, but we have a few minutes left. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask you some rapid-fire questions. Are you
Sure.
game?
Yes.
Okay. Parental leave policy.
Yes.
I heard your speech at the Republican convention. You advocated that as something very important. You have a huge success, just signed into law in the last few weeks.
Yeah.
There's a new law that says every federal worker gets paid parental leave. Are you going to stop there? Or are you going to keep going all the way?
Thank you. We are really excited about this. And look, it goes back to the first question. What are the barriers that exist today for people to be able to provide for themselves and their families? The reality is things have changed pretty rapidly in recent decades. Women now are 47% of the American workforce. In 40% of American homes, women are the primary breadwinners. And so while paid parental leave is not a women's issue, we're fighting for it to apply to mothers and fathers, adoptive parents, but we're not stopping there.
It does
first of all, as
disproportionately
fall on the shoulders. Many people don't know this, but actually the first national paid family leave plan was enacted, which offers a credit to employers offering paid leave to employees making under $72,000 a year, which means they're very unlikely to receive paid leave otherwise. So we put in place that tax credit that is there, that's available. We also have worked with members on both sides of the aisle, and recently was introduced the first bipartisan, bicameral, so bipartisan sponsors in both the House and the Senate, paid family leave option that enables people to take their child tax credit and pull it forward when they need it the most. So we're quite excited about that option. The child tax credit in itself was a massive victory. So just to put these numbers in perspective, because we often say we doubled the child tax credit, and Republicans doubled the child tax credit, and we're very proud of that. But just to give you a sense of how consequential this is, and this is something I fought for so hard as part of tax reform, I was so passionate about, because the greatest investment we can make is in the next generation of this country, our kids. And it's very, very expensive raising children, especially at a time, and now this is changing, but especially at a time when wages is stagnated and the cost of childcare is skyrocketing. But in doubling the child tax credit in tax year 2019 alone, 40 million American families benefited on average $2,200 a family. It's remarkable.
Okay.
So we're very proud of that. Can I give you one other thing?
Sure, but I have a few more questions.
Childcare. Childcare is enormously expensive, and we see how it is a major constraint to people being able to work, but not only being able to work, being able to excel in their careers. They can't take that promotion. They can't work more hours because they can't afford the care to do so. This administration, in the past 2 years, have increased the Child Care and Development Block Grants. That's the largest government program. It's money that's given to governors to offset the cost of child care for working Americans who can't afford it. We have enacted a 50% increase over just 2 years, the largest increase in the program's history by far, to try and make child care affordable and accessible. And the result of that, we just hosted an across the nation listening session with educators, with parents, with care providers. The result of that has been the elimination of wait lists in countless states across this country. So people who are wanting to work and are trying to get into childcare programs can actually get into the programs because the wait list has been eliminated, and we think that's going to have a tremendous impact in terms of workforce participation rates and opportunity for upward mobility.
Okay.
And I'm going to stop there.
I have
I've got a few more, but
I have a couple of quick pipeline questions.
Yeah.
So you actually recently succeeded in convincing Republicans to continue funding of historically black colleges. What are a couple of other things we could do to bring underrepresented groups into higher paying jobs?
yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question. HBCUs, minority serving institutions, are core to this country. They're some of the greatest institutions. And when you think about diversity in fields like computer science, like STEM, 30% of minority graduates that are working in STEM-related industries graduated from an HBCU. So they're critical to the discussion of diversity in industries that you all represent. So the president has been very vocal and long been a champion of not only funding and up funding them, because we actually increased funding, but what was happening is they would get reauthorized every 2 years, every 2 years, every 2 years, and their funding was always in a state of flux and at risk. And he committed a minimum of $200 million annually in grants that can be applied for by state superintendents. And he put into the guidance that there needs to be a specific focus on women and minorities as those grants are being considered and contemplated. Separately, we worked alongside with the private sector, and I love always working alongside with the private sector because they really help us scale our ideas and bring thoughtful and fresh perspective to the table. But the day after we announced that, I traveled to Detroit. Again, Salesforce was part of this commitment. So was Lockheed Martin, so was Apple, where we got the private sector to step up and join us in committing an additional $300 million towards the shared goal, again with a focus on creating a pipeline early of women and minorities in these fast-growing, high-paying industries of the future.
Great. Another pipeline question. Immigration. Both our mothers are immigrants. My wife, a surgeon, is an immigrant. And research shows that immigrants actually create companies disproportionately, and they're very hardworking.
Yeah.
How can we keep this pipeline open for the future, especially given the shortage of skilled workers we have now?
Well, the president said that he thinks it's absolutely insane that we educate immigrants from across the world, and as they are about to start their business, open their business, become employers, we throw them out of our country. It doesn't make sense. Our immigration system is totally flawed. If you compare our immigration system with that of our neighbor to the north, Canada, it makes no sense. So immigration, I think, would have bipartisan agreement that it needs to be overhauled and become relevant to both the jobs and the skills we need to attract to continue to grow and thrive. But it can't displace the investment that needs to be made in the core skills of marginalized Americans. So that's where we have to be careful. We need to do both. We need to recruit and retain the greatest talent in the world to help us grow and innovate, but we need to invest in American workers and reach over to the sidelines, draw them into our workforce, and equip them with the skills that they need to thrive. And we can't just seek to import that.
Well, I know we have way exceeded our time guidelines, and I apologize for that, but it's obvious we have a lot more to talk about. I am so happy that you came here and brought your perspective. Your passion on the issue is contagious. I can say that personally. So thank you very much for coming and sharing, and I hope you get to see a little bit of CES and enjoy Las Vegas. And I look forward, on behalf of the industry, we want to work with you. We want to create jobs. I personally believe that no matter who is president in the future, these type of things that you're putting in place through your leadership, frankly, and your councils, and including the private sector, will and shall continue. They're very important.
If we can't come together on this, we can't come together on anything.
Well, the truth is they don't get a lot of publicity because they're not bipartisan.
I'm sure